Okay, hey guys, worship cohort leaders, pastors, welcome. I get the chance today to talk with Robbie Seay, which is exciting for me. So thanks for joining us today, man.
Man, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of us have seen kind of what you're doing on the Converge calls, and you had one a couple weeks ago that you led with leaders, and it was a great conversation, a great time of encouragement. And so I really want to follow up on that for those of us who weren't able to join you. It was just a time of encouragement for us in this unprecedented season that we're all in right now.
Sure.
And I believe we have some golden opportunities to really engage our people in different ways and engage each other in different ways. And so I just appreciate you taking the time to encourage us today, just impart some wisdom and some thoughts that you have. So thanks, and we love it.
Man, absolutely.
So like I said, this is an unprecedented situation. These are unknown waters that we're all navigating, and it has drastically changed the way leading our people in worship and engaging with our teams, what that looks like. This is, no one has done this before this way. So as you've thought about it, experienced it, and talked with other people, what are some things that you think we need to be mindful of as we try to execute every week?
No, it's a good question, Chris. I think if you break the role of the worship pastor down into three segments, we touched on this on the phone call with Converge, but just like maybe a quick review, or if somebody wasn't on the call. But the way that I often think about the role is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in three different areas. One is musical. That one's kind of obvious, right? I mean, we have an art form that we bring most often. That is going to mean music, but in some cases that may mean some different art forms. But in this, for the sake of this conversation, there's the music side of what we do, and so we're pursuing excellence in that. Yeah, I mean we want to do a good job in that. We want to grow in our musicianship. We want to grow in our creativity. All those things. That's one area, right? The second area would be development. This idea that there's a culture of development around us that says, hey, it's not enough for me just to be gifted. Yes, as the worship pastor or worship leader, whatever the case is, I do bring a certain amount of gifting to this, and I should, and I'm compensated for it, right? So that is part of the equation, but that's not enough. That I would look around and see other leaders, oftentimes lay people in our church, and say, hey, I want you to lead with me. So I want to see you grow as a leader. I want to invest in you. And I want to establish a culture of development. So there's the musicianship side of this. There is this idea of growing leaders, a culture of leadership development. And then lastly, this is not a gig for us. I mean, we are on a pastoral team. Now, you may not consider yourself a pastor, or you may, I don't know. But whatever you consider yourself doesn't matter. You are going to be pastoring and shepherding people in some way. With a microphone in front of you, yes. Off of a stage, as you counsel and point people to Jesus and hopefully are a part of discipleship, yes. The point of unpacking all that for your question is this. When we think about the challenges right now, the challenges aren't necessarily just how do I do a great job on video in terms of my musicianship. I think by now, most of us, Chris, are seeing progress. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's like week to week, you're like, hey, this feels better. Our mixes sound better. Whoever's mixing our audio, hey, this looks better because we figured out some ways to improve camera angles, whatever the case is. We're kind of growing in that, to be honest. I think when we get to the end of the season, that's the area of this whole, church online, remote church, whatever, I think is going to see the most growth. I think most likely leaders are going to feel more confident on camera and off camera. I think they'll be more creative. I think we're having to get more creative. There's probably more collaboration now than before this happens. I don't know about you, but most of our leaders that are going to be listening right now are just going to go, yeah, I'm collaborating with some of my team in ways that we never even thought about. So like my church is doing what a lot of churches are doing this week. We haven't done it in weeks past, but all these volunteer musicians. One guy works in oil and gas. One lady's a teacher. They're all volunteers, but they're recording at their houses. We've dropped gear off for them, and we're kind of putting it all together. That's a collaboration that's just unique. So I'm not necessarily concerned about that. Here's my concern, and here's my answer to your question: is these other two areas as a leader they're not quite as obvious to us on how we're going to grow and how we're going to maintain momentum. It's not obvious to many of us, even to me and you sitting on this call, what are some new ways that we're going to have to lean into developing others right now? And so I would imagine that a lot of the leaders who are watching this would go, man, actually, yeah, I am starting to see some ways that are, okay, I'm leaning into relationships that albeit distant with my team that weren't obvious to me 2 weeks ago. And I hope that's the case. But I guess my point is that's the area where I just go, man, we need to have that on our radar right now. How are we developing others? And by developing, I don't mean just musicianship, although that's part of it. Mm-hmm. So they need to figure out how do we see them grow as musicians, but as followers of Jesus. And so that we're a part of their discipleship. Hopefully not the only source of discipleship, and probably not even the primary source of discipleship. If they're involved in a small group or there's another way that they're digging into the word with other believers, but we're a part of it. And then also, how are we pastoring people? Because we're not with people. So we're interfacing like this, but we're just not engaging people on the same way. And so how are we a part of shepherding people from afar? Those are the areas that I just go, man, I don't want to lose sight of those. As I'm thinking about the challenges of every week producing new content, being on camera, how do we get better at that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's going to be taking care of itself. It's the other two areas that I would have concern for myself and for us as leaders.
Yeah, you really touched on kind of the next thought that I had in this conversation, which is like, you even said the obvious versus the not obvious. Do you see the obvious being any sort of a distraction from or making us neglect the not obvious?
Yeah, and I would hope that even just a conversation like this is a reminder to each of us mm-hmm. that we need to have we need to be sensitive to that. Mm-hmm. In other words, I don't know about you, but I enjoy the idea of each week figuring out some new creative ways to contribute to our online gatherings. Honestly, it's been kind of fun. Mm-hmm. I don't know that. So I guess when you say obvious, to me, those are some of the things you just go, man, most of us are going to lean into that. Mm-hmm. And I do think that we can go overboard with that and realize that is only a small component of the season, because that's 1 hour out of each week that we have the attention of our people. But how are they doing on Wednesday morning? How are they doing on Friday night, being isolated and, some of them battling different challenges, job loss or isolation or relationships that are breaking down, whatever the case is. How are we leaning into shepherding? And then how are we, when we get back to normal, whatever that is, when we get back to normal and our teams come back together in person, are we going to be at a deficit? Or is there going to be some surplus in terms of leadership development? I think that's the question we got to start asking as we start getting closer to the summer. Are we going to be at a major deficit because it was like timeout on any kind of developing of team? We'll just figure that out when we get back together. Or, man, I was able to, and forgive me for using the word because it's overused right now, but just pivot. Mm-hmm. I was able to pivot in the way that I'm investing in my team. Those things are not as obvious to us. It's just not, we haven't had to think through some of these challenges in this way. And so, yeah, I hope so. I hope that we're not distracted. Mm-hmm. The things that are obvious to us in terms of our creativity and what we're contributing to Sunday mornings, in most cases, and that we're able to lean into these other two main areas. And by the way, I know that doesn't encompass the entire conversation, but I'm just trying to give us a framework here of most of our responsibilities as a worship pastor are going to fall under those three umbrellas, which is why I point us to those three areas.
Yeah. So it sounds like the development of team, training of leaders, that pouring into that relationship is something that you would say we need to not only be mindful of right now, but continue to push on, pursue, and be mindful of as we try to make plans and transition back into gatherings in the coming couple of months, it sounds like, with them saying governors are going to be able to dictate which states slowly reopen. What do we, suggest, all that stuff. I know these conversations have started with our staff and started with a lot of our leaders in the cohort and their staffs. Are there trends that you've seen happen or things that you've seen come up during this period that you would love to see continue when we start gathering back together?
Yeah, I think I'm following your question there, and I don't know, man. It's hard. It's hard for me. Maybe I don't know if it's easier for some of the leaders watching. It's just hard to tell what actually is going to produce fruit in the next season, and what trends, if you will, are going to actually be helpful to us. I don't know, which is why I just maybe just beat the drum even louder, just to say, okay, God, how am I encouraging members of our team? Number one, I want to make sure they just are they connected. Number two, how can I contribute to their growth as a musician and as a follower of Jesus? Now, I had a plan when we were all getting together every week, but how does that plan need to adapt right now so that when we get back together, we're not at a loss. We've actually seen a gain in this area. And so I don't know if there's trends that I just go, man, I'm like, oh, we got to keep this going. I think more than anything, it's just a matter of how especially in the next month, I think, because I'm not even sure, no matter what governor says, do this or do that, I just don't know in the next month that any of us are getting back together in a normal gathering. So in the next month, what kind of leader can I be outside of that hour Sunday morning gathering? And that's what I just am getting fired up about, because I actually think, man, and again, I know your question was what trends are going to be helpful. And sure. I'm not great at that. I just think, man, we might get on the other side of that and actually feel like we saw momentum, because right now we're able to pivot and say, these are some tangible areas I can really lean into my team. They feel connected. They're growing in their musicianship and they're growing as a follower of Jesus. So when things actually return to some sense of normalcy, in other words, we're playing and sharing music together to the glory of God in person, our team is flourishing and not playing catch up. Those are the conversations I get excited about.
Yeah. And I love that you broke down those three areas kind of in each of these questions, because for me, those aren't always in the grind of every week, every day, thinking about gatherings, whether it be now online or in person. Those aren't always active thoughts in my head. And for me, those are very centering. Those are very grounding. When I think about those things, it helps me focus on what my daily goals need to be and what my daily focus needs to be and what I have to be not just carving out time for in my schedule, but building my schedule around. And I think those are two different things, because, you talk about mentoring people or training leaders or pouring into a couple people on your team and really, building them up. Or maybe it's interns, maybe someone has a couple interns underneath them. Sure. My schedule doesn't need to always be dictated around every meeting that I have to be a part of. It has to be dictated around the things that matter most.
That's right.
And so I feel like you've touched on a lot of that, even just in these questions regarding this craziness that we're dealing with right now, because again, those are just very foundational. And I think in them being foundational or whatever, we lose sight of them easier because we get focused on, oh, I got to get the tracks ready for this weekend, or I got to do this. And I don't think any of the extra things are bad. I just think they take away from things that we can't be taken away from.
I totally agree. I'll just say one more thing on this, Chris, because I think this is important for us to just be reminded of. When I say that we've got these three areas of focus for this role, I believe it. And again, somebody may go, hey, there's kind of a fourth area. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. But what I always say to myself and to other leaders is, in different seasons of ministry, some of those dials are going to get turned up and down. So in other words, if you and I are having this conversation 5 4 weeks ago, the dial that's cranked up is this idea of musicianship, the Sunday morning gathering, the how are we going to do this with excellence and with care and with consistency, because for a lot of us, it just was a total game changer. So we probably wouldn't have time in that specific season of ministry to go, you know what we need to talk about right now? Really developing others. You know, we'd be like, hey, it's a it's a non-starter that Sunday mornings get figured out.
Yep.
Right.
Sunday's always coming.
So that dial is cranked, but now we've established some kind of rhythm in this for at least most of us. And now we can go, that dial's kind of on, you know, it's on cruise control or whatever. I mean, it's kind of set. Now we can start to move to some of these other areas. It's not this idea that those 3 areas and focus of ministry are always the same and that the needs of your ministry are always going to be the same in each season. It may be coming up that you need to really lean into the pastoring part, because if we don't meet again in person for another 10 weeks, I have no idea, by the way, might be 2 weeks. I have no clue. But if it's another 10, the pastoring dial might need to get cranked. You need to be vigilant about checking on people. You need to have real talk with people. And whether or not Sunday morning was awesome may not really matter as much, because people are just straight up having a tough go. You know, I mean, it could be more serious at that, right? So I just see it as kind of, you know, dials that get turned up, and ministry will dictate when it's time to turn up and turn down. It's not that all of them are at 10 and you got to go, okay, crud, I got to be awesome at all these things. No, by the grace of God, he's going to lead you as a leader. He is going to lead you and allow you to focus in on the things that are in front of you in your ministry, which is why I know you weren't recording earlier. We're talking about context, but which is why context matters, because the needs of your people, Chris, may not be the exact needs of my people right now. You may go, hey man, great to hear from you on that, but here are the needs of my people. That's why context matters a ton. This is not a playbook that we all just go, okay, what play are we running? Let's run it. No, our playbook is actually dictated by the people that we're serving in the local context. And so I want to make sure that that kind of caveat gets put on the conversation, because we need to be able to, by the Spirit leading us, like adapt to the needs of our people in front of us. And so that matters here.
Absolutely. And just for my perspective, here's hoping that it's not another 10 weeks, because I will need people to check on me like crazy.
well, yeah, I mean, it's so true. Maybe we'll check on each other. Me and you will be doing a weekly call, like, how you doing? Because this is not easy. But yeah, you're totally right. You're absolutely right.
Yep. So just as a final thought, if you had one thing that you could say to any worship leader, pastor, whoever watching this, what's the one thing that you would want to say right now?
It's a great question. I think I would just take the worship pastor hat off for a second. And just as brothers in Christ, just say, let this be a season where you look back and your marriage is stronger for those of you who are married. If you're not married, that as a man, I don't want to assume that everybody's a man on this call. So as a man or a single man or a single woman, that you leaned into the companionship of the Lord, and in your marriage, you do the same thing. And then what happens in your home then is fuel in the tank as a leader. I think sometimes what we can do in times of, this isn't, it is a crisis. So, but sometimes in crisis, or at least situations that are abnormal, I can get really excited and start sprinting and get way ahead of myself and realize that God didn't really ask me to be a sprinter, and I'm not that fast. to just belabor the analogy there. But what I think God's really calling me to be is faithful husband and father to my children. And what is happening in my home right now needs to be fuel in my tank as a leader. And so that when it's time to record Sunday morning, gathering, and when it's time to pour into leaders on my team, and when it's time to pastor and shepherd people, I'm actually able to do that from a sincere place. And so none of this stuff matters. None of these conversations are worth anything If I'm not a genuine follower of Jesus, if my wife couldn't get on this call with me right now and say he is doing his best, he means it because he's pursuing the Lord, he's leading me to do the same. None of this stuff has any kind of lasting value.
Yeah.
We're not leading anybody anywhere if we're not being led by the Spirit in our own homes. And I just say that very humbly because I do have 5 kids, 4 in the house. I got 4 kids under my roof right now. I got a wife of 22 years, and just nothing is more important than that right now. Now, out of that, God is going to hopefully just birth leadership in our churches, faithful men and women who are serving as an overflow of their personal worship and obedience under their own roofs. But man, that just has to matter more than all these other conversations. I geek out about leadership conversations. I love it. I know you do too, which is why you gather these leaders and say, let's talk about this, dig into this. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I need it. But I don't need it more than my personal sanctification in the word and with my bride. And then leading my kids in that. So I just on a personal note, I would just say, man, let's dig in. Let's follow Jesus. And then out of an overflow, let's lead our churches.
That's good. Good things, not ultimate things, right?
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
I'm with you. So just to finish up real quick, a couple fun rapid fire questions for you. Are you binge watching anything? And if so, what?
What's funny is we're not big TV people. So I would say no. But I am just loving I have a 14-year-old basketball player in my house, and he wants to play in college. And I'm like, dude, go for it. He's a big, tall kid, and he's a good player. And so he didn't know how great MJ was. So we're stinking loving
The Last Dance.
We got like the clean version downloaded, because MJ can't talk for more than like one sentence without dropping bombs. So you're like, dude, could you just cool it? But
right.
But we're loving that. And actually, I mean, in all seriousness, there's like a ton of life lessons in that. He was a killer on the court. He's kind of a lousy dude off the court. So to talk to my 14-year-old about, okay, how do you balance these things? I mean, it's kind of a real thing, but we're loving that for sure.
Yeah. I watched it last night. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
What music have you been listening to that has encouraged you or that you've loved the most during this quarantine season?
Yeah. It's funny, man. I know this is, maybe there's some leaders that can relate to this, but music's such a huge part of my life that I don't listen to a ton of music when I'm for leisure. I just don't. I tend to listen to podcasts, and I love like spiritual podcasts. And then I love like totally not spiritual, like true crime, all that kind of stuff. So like I go for like a 45-minute bike ride now, every night. So I'm typically listening to like, Monster DC Sniper, instead of like an album.
Nice.
And then, but a cheap plug is in my house. My wife is cranking an album that I was a part of. So kind of cheap promotion. I'm sorry to do this, but the Worship Initiative is an amazing Shane and Shane's, and it's got to sing some songs on their latest record. And we truly tend to fast forward the songs that I sang because my kids are like, I don't need to hear Dad. But we are loving the songs on there. Dinah Wright and the Shanes, of course, and some others just killing these songs. So Volume 20 Worship Initiative, we love that.
Yeah, I'm a subscriber. I love
awesome.
their stuff that they're putting out.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Last one. I know that you released the live version of Psalm 66 a couple weeks ago. Are you currently working on anything that's coming up that we can look forward to?
Yeah, it's kind of a fun time because, content, there's no rules on content right now. So it's like release whatever you got. And so for us, we're going to release hopefully a single in the next 6 weeks is our hope. And that would be tied to a full record in the fall. And so I don't know how that exactly is going to play out, but that's the idea. And then also in kind of partnership with that would be maybe a 5-song EP of just me and my voice, maybe a little piano on some hymns and some spirituals that maybe we wouldn't put on a full band record. Sure. And would sound a little more acoustic. And so that's been fun. And then we got some more video content that we're about to release that's got audio, good, high quality audio. So it's kind of fun, man, to be honest.
Nice.
but we're singing some new songs. I think the song, there's a song called Hallelujah, Christ Will Come Again. I've never been more excited about a song that I've been a part of, not because I think it's just awesome, just because I think it communicates the truths of the gospel that we need to be singing. And I wrote with a friend. And so we've been singing that at my church, and I sang it at Linger, which is Shane's conference. They're going to release all the live footage of my session. And so, I don't know, it's fun. I think everybody who's watching this probably would agree. It's a fun time because you can kind of go, okay, here's a content strategy that maybe wouldn't have worked 5 years ago that totally works now. So excited about all that.
Well, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing and jumping on here and just imparting some wisdom, some encouragement, some advice, and love what you're doing. And just thanks again.
Man, Chris, thank you for having me. Bless you, man. Appreciate what you're doing.
All right. Have a good one.
Talk soon.